I'm so glad that you could join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles Inside Story. Over the last several podcasts, we've been talking about various problems regarding the criminal justice system. And one of them is in regards to the number of cases involving drugs or narcotics. And for years, many laws were passed regarding use of drugs, sale of drugs, and it was up to the police to enforce those laws and then bring the matter to the courts, and the court had to adjudicate it. It wasn't that big an item back maybe in the 1950s, but then it grew in the 60s and 70s, and it consumed a great deal of the time of the courts. Now, I've been involved in the criminal justice system for over half a century. And I remember back handling cases involving many kilos of marijuana that were seized in attics or in houses. And also one time I did a search warrant of, it was kind of a warehouse area. Got in there and there was a pill making machine there. And it was amazing how it could, I think it was amphetamines that it was producing, thousands and thousands of those in a day. So it was very, very active. A lot of drugs were being produced and sold in the Los Angeles area. Also, what was popular at the time was PCP, very, very dangerous. And there was a lot of drug labs that I prosecuted, and yeah, I mean, here you can see some of the chemicals that they used, how dangerous it was for them to put these drug labs in a house, in a residential area. And just here you can see the barrels of toxic material that we would find when we did these search warrants. So drugs was very, very prevalent, and a lot of the time of the court was taken up on those drug cases. Now, I want to talk about several specific cases, and the first one I'm going to be talking about is the Wonderland Avenue case, and it all starts out with drugs being used in Hollywood. There was always drugs and a lot of drugs used, and there was a place in Hollywood, it was Laurel Canyon. A lot of musicians lived in Laurel Canyon, and some of you would recognize the Mamas and Papas, Crosby, Nash, Stills, many, Morrison. They all lived in this Laurel Canyon area, and they had to get their drugs somewhere. And then where did they buy it? And the most common place there was on Wonderland Avenue. And this is the house, the drug house they would go to buy their drugs, and it was well known by everyone. Your reaction would be, why didn't the police do something about it? Well, they tried, but it was very well run. It was very sophisticated how they did it, and they did it by tin cans and a string. So people would pull up down below the balcony, they'd say what they wanted, put in their order. They were told how much money to put in the tin can would come up, and the money would come out. They would put the drugs in it, they would lower it down. The person who grabbed the drugs, they'd take off. Now the police, they were aware of what was going on, but there was nothing they could do because everything was gone by the time the police got there. There was no one they could arrest. So it went on and on and on. So we're talking about the sale of drugs. And it was, I guess you could say, out in the open. Now, one of the men who lived in that house in Wonderland, his name was John Holmes. And some of you might remember him. He was a porn star at the time. His nickname was 12 and a half inches. And he was strung out on cocaine. He, he made a lot of money in the porn business, but he snuffed it all up in his nose. And he bought most of it, or got most of his cocaine from Eddie Nash. Now, Eddie Nash was a very prominent businessman in Hollywood. He owned many of the topless bars in the San Fernando Valley, and he had a number of nightclubs on the Sunset Strip. And he did a lot of drug business in these various businesses that he had. So that is the connection between Holmes and Eddie Nash. Now, going back to that Wonderland Avenue house, those people who lived in the house with Holmes, they were running out of drugs. They had used it all up, they had sold it all, but they needed more. And they were thinking, okay, how can they do it? They know that Eddie Nash has a huge stash of it, and he lives in the Hollywood Hills there, and they talk to Holmes and says, why don't you help us out? And why don't we go over and rip off, all those drugs from Eddie Nash? And they talk Holmes to go over there, and he agrees. He says, okay, I'll go over there. And he goes to Eddie Nash's place, and he leaves the back door, there's a sliding door, to leave it unlocked, so that the next, that morning, I don't know, it could have been around 4:30 or maybe 5 o'clock, these men from the Wonderland house, they sneak in that back door and they go in there, and they're able to get all those drugs from Eddie Nash. And Eddie Nash had a lot. He had a lot of cash there, because drugs have to be a cash business. And I don't know, it was like 8 pounds of cocaine, huge amount of drugs. So they get it all, they take it, and go back to Wonderland address. Now, what happened the next day was kind of interesting, was that for what reason, we don't know, John Holmes is down in the Hollywood area, and he's wandering around, and the Eddie Nash's thugs, they're out there and they're trying to figure out who did this rip-off of Eddie, and they see Holmes with the jewelry, some of the jewelry that had been stolen from Eddie Nash's house the night before. So they get Holmes, they take him over to Nash, and Nash puts the pressure on him and says, look, if you don't tell me who was involved in this rip-off of my house, I'm going to kill you and kill your wife and your family. Holmes got scared to death. He was afraid that Eddie was going to kill him. And he said, okay. It was the people who live at Wonderland. They were the ones who, took, your dope and your money. And he said, okay, then you take my, thugs down to that house tonight and get in there. Well, it was impossible to get in there by yourself because it was locked up. It had gates around it. And the only way is you had to get on the phone, you had to call, and the person inside had to recognize you. So Holmes goes in, since he lived there some of the time, stayed there a lot of the time, and he calls on the phone there, and the lady said, what do you want? Well, I've got some dope here I'm supposed to deliver. And so she opens the door, and at that point, Eddie's thugs, they rush in, and they get her, and they beat her. They beat her to death. Right there on the floor, you can see she is killed on the floor, on the first floor. And then they proceed upstairs, and they find another lady there, and they had pipes. Now, some people call it lead pipes. I think they were just galvanized pipes. They were heavy, and they just bashed in the heads of these people who lived in the Wonderland house. And then they proceeded further to the top bedroom, and there were 2 people up there. And again, they were beat to death, and there's blood all over the house, brain matter everywhere. So it was a real bloody mess. And this photo here just shows you all the different places that these people were found. And that's why it was called 4 on the Floor, a famous case because there were 4 people. Now, one of them survived, but she was never the same. Her brain had been bashed in, and she couldn't remember what had happened. So when Eddie Nash's, buddies going through the house, they found almost all of the drugs that had been taken from Eddie Nash's house. And this is where you can see they went through these drawers and found it all. So I guess you could say it was a successful retaliation. They got even. Eddie Nash got even with those people who had ripped him off. So, okay, what am I talking about? That Wonderland house was a drug house where drugs were sold. But look how it ended up. all these people killed there over drugs. Now I want to take another case that some of you are going to be familiar with, and it has to do with John DeLorean. John DeLorean, he got to start in the automobile industry back in Detroit. He started with the Packard Corporation, did very well, worked his way up. Then he went over to General Motors, and he was very good in the engineering department, and he got to the very top of Pontiac division. And General Motors executives realized that, hey, how instrumental he was in the success of these cars. So they brought him over to Chevrolet, and he goes to the top of that. He's rising to the very top of General Motors. However, he has a disagreement with the top executives about how cars should be manufactured and how they should be sold. So he leaves. He just walks out and leaves General Motors. Then after a year or two, he thought, you know, I could design a better car and produce a better car than any of these manufacturers in Detroit. So he decides to build what is called the DMC-12. And it was a very unique car. It was a two-seater sports car. It had a stainless steel body, and it had gull wings. You know, the doors opened up on the side. And the reason it was called DMC-12 is he felt he could manufacture it and sell it for $12,000. So he's trying to find a place now. Where should he manufacture this car? And he works out with the British government. They gave him 100 million pounds to produce it in Ireland, near Belfast, Ireland. And he builds the plant there. Very efficient, does it very well. And, you know, they're producing, you know, a car that really is noticed. It's so noticed that almost everybody knows it. From the back to the future, it was the car that was used in it. That was a modified DeLorean car. Now, he is doing such a good job at producing them. They were manufacturing, you know, as many as, you know, just thousands of them. However, there's a recession, and they're not able to sell them. And they're being sold for more than $12,000, and they're almost about $20,000 or $25,000. So he can't sell them. And now the company has problems. The banks are coming after John DeLorean and saying, hey, you've got to pay your loans off. He doesn't have the money. He can't do it. How is he going to turn around? The company is failing. It is in receivership. And somebody mentions to him that, you know, if you get into the drug business, you can make a lot of money. And some people talk him into it, and he gets $24 million, and he buys drugs, cocaine, and he's able to flip it around to $100 million. He will be able to save the DeLorean company with this drug deal. So he goes out to, you know, it's a hotel near LAX, the airport in LA, and he's in there in the room with a drug dealer, and he has the money in a briefcase. He gives it to the dealer. The dealer hands over the cocaine. And I think DeLorean said something like, this is as good as gold. And it was. This was going to save his company and save his reputation. The next thing he knew, there were FBI agents coming out of every closet in that hotel room. And he was arrested. He was arrested for the purchase of drugs and possession for sale of all that cocaine that he had just purchased. So obviously that ruined his reputation, and his business, you know, couldn't be saved after doing that. So the point that I'm trying to make, that is a case of possession for sale of a huge amount of cocaine and the difficulty you can get into. Now I want to go into another case that I did a lot of work on, and it involves a young man, Sean Hong. He was going to graduate school at UCLA. He was trying to earn his MBA, but he was very good at business. He knew how to make money, and he realized you could make a lot of money growing marijuana. The cultivation of marijuana was going to be a very prominent way for him to make money without getting caught. And he rents a house out in Canoga Park. And it's a nondescript house. You wouldn't recognize, the police would never, ever think that marijuana is being cultivated inside that house. So he set it up, and in the back room, the 2 back bedrooms were converted into growing rooms of marijuana. And he had this false wall that he put in there. So if the police, if they ever went into that house, they would never be able to find those back rooms that where the marijuana was. So that was working out very, very well for him. And this is the growing rooms before the marijuana pots were put in there. But he had the lighting system, and he had the watering, and those are the key. So you need a plumber, you need an electrician, but you also need somebody to take care of those plants and then manicure them so you can get the marijuana for use. So Sean's looking around, who can I trust? Who can I get in there? And he finds that there is a young man from Israel. He's over here, and he wants to be a disc jockey, and he needs a place to stay. So Sean said, hey, you can stay at my place. All you have to do is check on the marijuana, make sure it's watered, and then you manicure it so that it can be sold. And it was Ben Würzberger, and yeah, that's fine. This was great. It was just something that he needed, and it worked very well for him. It was a neat place to live. As a matter of fact, they had a spa, a water spa, in the living room. So they could, Ben could invite young women over there. They could be in the spa having a wonderful time. Of course, in the back bedrooms, the marijuana was growing. So that went on for a number of months, and everybody was happy. Things were coming along just right. And Ben decides to go to Las Vegas. He can get better jobs up there as a disc jockey. So he leaves for Vegas. And now Sean doesn't have anybody to look over the marijuana, the house there. And one night he's ripped off. Somebody breaks into that house and takes all the marijuana plants, cuts them all, takes all that marijuana. That's thousands of dollars of marijuana. So he's, livid. He's upset, and he's going to have to start all over again. It's going to cost him a lot of money. And he wants to get even and find the person. The next thing that we know about is that Ben Würzberger goes missing. He never arrives in Las Vegas, where he was supposed to be going. And eventually his relatives from Israel contact the FBI and say, our son is missing. Can you check on him and see where he is and what they could. The FBI eventually gets involved in it, and they're trying to, where could he be? And he's not where they thought he would be. And they knew that he had contact with this Sean Hong. He had worked for him. Didn't know it was a marijuana business, but it worked for him. So they contact Sean and says, hey, what do you know about this Israeli DJ that's disappeared? And he says, no, I don't know anything about it. He did work for me. Yeah, we had a little marijuana business, and I thought I got ripped off, but I don't know. He left, went to Vegas, and never heard from him again. However, the FBI kept prying around, and they found that there was some partner, a guy named Francis, and they contacted him and said, do you know anything about this DJ from Israel? They said, yeah, I know something about it. And then he goes in and explains that there was a falling out between Sean and this Würzberger, and he was killed. And they, oh, okay, then tell us all about it. What had happened? And he said, I don't really know all the details. All I know is he was buried up off of the freeway that goes to Las Vegas, or Los Angeles. Where? Well, I don't know. I don't remember. But there was a house, it was a business, a building that had a blue roof, and it had a .com, a www sign on it. And all I know is, from there was a campground, and the bodies were buried over there. There was a gravesite there. And so the FBI, that's all the FBI had. And so a day later, the FBI gets a helicopter and they fly that route from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And as they're going past Barstow, they're going along, they're looking for a building with a blue roof and .com. And they did. They saw a building, and it was an old real estate building there. It was not occupied at the time, but there it was. And there was a campground, the Afton campground to the right. And they went down there. They get agents to go down there, and they start checking that area out. And they check all over it. They can't find any grave. There was supposed to be a deep grave where these bodies were buried. Nothing is found, and the FBI is about to give up. And somebody made the comment, well, why don't we get a cadaver dog and see if the cadaver dog might find something. So the next morning, they have a cadaver dog come up to this site, and there's a dog that's going around sniffing, and he comes to the back, one of the campsites, at the rear portion of that campsite, where that arrow is, starts sniffing and digging. And the FBI agent goes over there with a shovel and starts digging, and he digs in there. They start digging a little deeper, and he hits, there is a shoe, and then there's a foot to the shoe, and there's a leg, and then there's bodies. There are two decomposed bodies, and it turns out to be that Ben Würzberger from Israel. So now they found the grave of that caretaker of the marijuana. So what I'm trying to say there, here we have a bright kid, Sean, who has his MBA by now. He graduates, and he ends up killing the caretaker who he thought ripped him off, who didn't rip him off. It was somebody else. And so Ben Würzberger is dead, and Sean is in prison for the rest of his life for cultivating some marijuana. Well, you wonder, is it worth it all? Now, I'm going to talk one more case that illustrates, and I did a lot of work on this case, and it's a little confusing, I understand, but there were three men who got together, and the one that we're going to be talking a lot about is, he was an attorney. He was an attorney back in New York, a criminal defense attorney, very prominent, but he represented a lot of narcotic dealers, and he learned from them how the narcotic business ran, and how you didn't have to pay taxes. It was lucrative. It was easy to do. So we have him in New York, the defense attorney. Then we have Baumgarten. He owned a nightclub in Miami, and part of a nightclub is, selling drugs. So he did very well in Miami, but he had contact with the attorney in New York, and they were thinking, wow, we could get into the drug business, but they needed somebody to do the day-to-day work for them. And Baumgarten's had a friend from school, a college friend, contacts this Peter Kovac and talks him into getting together with him. So here we have these three men in a partnership, a drug business of transportation of drugs. Now, it was Peter Kovac's job to get, the dope in California, in Los Angeles. The quality and the price is so much better in Los Angeles, and then it has to be transported all the way to New York. So he, is out here in Los Angeles doing very well, getting everything set up, and the decision has to be made as to how do you transport the marijuana, the cocaine, and the drugs to New York. You could fly them there, but you have those pesky dogs at the airport who sniff around, and they're very effective. So flying isn't going to work, and then putting on a railroad car, that makes sense. However, it takes a long time, and these railroad cars get broken into, and you don't always get your dope at the other end. But what many drug dealers knew, and that is you rent U-Haul trucks, and you drive from Los Angeles to New York or anywhere on the East Coast. You can make a fortune that way. So U-Haul trucks are the way to go. However, they knew that the drug enforcement agents had discovered this, and they knew that, I don't know whether you can say 50% of the U-Haul trucks that were coming across Kansas and Iowa were filled with dope going to the East Coast. So Peter knew that was not the way to go, but he wanted to find a way that would be effective, cost-effective, and in which they wouldn't get caught. And he came up with this idea of using a motorhome, an RV. He got this used RV, and he bought it, and he tore out the floor, and he was able to put all those kilos and kilos of marijuana and also cocaine and drugs, and then put a new floor on top of the RV on the flooring there, and nobody would know. You walk in there, you would never know it was filled with drugs. And then the idea, so that it wouldn't attract any attention, this RV, they decided to get two young ladies to drive it. So, when you talk about a foolproof system, that was perfect. Now, they sent $400,000 in cash to Peter to buy all the drugs that they needed, and he receives the money, he goes out, he makes the big purchases, and as I say, they put all that drugs in that RV, and they have the girls start driving. And they start from LA, they drive out, and they're doing very well. They're getting all the way out there, and they're crossed over the Mississippi, they're in Illinois, and all of a sudden there's a state trooper with his red lights on and pulls them over. And the girls don't know, well, what in the world? They didn't know what to do. They pull over, and the state trooper, he says, hey, where's your registration? And they open the door, and he can smell. It reeked of marijuana. So they were able to do a search. They find all, that $400,000 of marijuana and cocaine in the RV. So they're arrested. The women are arrested. But what happens to the three men who were involved in this, the transportation of the drugs? The attorney and the nightclub owner on the East Coast say, hey, we gave you $400,000, Peter, and we didn't get our dope. We want that $400,000 back. And he said, well, I don't have it. I bought the dope and I sent it to you. And they said it was your fault. And what had happened was that Peter was smart in getting that RV, taking the floor out, getting everything in it. However, he didn't pay attention to the tags on the license plate. It didn't have the current registration. It was 1 year off. And that's what attracted the attention to the state trooper in Illinois. So they went after Peter and said, look, you give us that $400,000 or we're going to kill you. And he said, I don't have it. So they had to kill him. So what am I saying? The drug business, as far as the sale, possession for sale, the cultivation, the manufacturing, and the transportation, yes, it is a good business. It's an easy business. No taxes. What could go wrong? Well, you have these very smart individuals. Maybe John Holmes may not have been the smartest, Mr. 12 and a half inches, but Eddie Nash, without a doubt, was the smartest businessman in Hollywood at the time. John DeLorean was thought of as one of the smartest executives in the United States. And you have Sean Hogg, who just graduated with his MBA. What a future. And then you have one of the most prominent criminal defense attorneys, Friedman, back in New York. These are smart people. How could the drug business go wrong? Well, it did. And there are consequences. And it all affects the criminal court because it creates a lot more cases, these drug cases that come through. They take a lot of time, as well as the peripheral cases, all of these murder cases. So I think hopefully you've learned something about the drug business. Even though it may be lucrative, it may be profitable, but it can come at a very high price. Well, hopefully you will join us for our next podcast. We will be talking about enforcement as well as investigation of drug cases. I think you'll find that fascinating because I was involved with that for almost 50 years. So please join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles Inside Story. And we'll talk about enforcement and investigation of drug cases. See you then.